Welcome to the show where we unearth new ways of looking at ever-evolving life around the world, seen from a number of different industries, cultures, and backgrounds. But there's one thing that unites everyone I speak to. They all want to do their part to make the world better in their own unique ways. It's a uniting passion. Whether they're from the commercial world, third sector, or public sector, from the global north or the global south, my name is Philippa White, and welcome to TIE Unearthed. The million-dollar question. Are ESGs there to protect companies and their money? Or are they there to help protect our planet? How will companies and countries start to meet net zero? And why is disrupting the comfort zones of employees a tool to a better world? Hello and welcome to episode 61 of TIE Unearthed. Today we're speaking with Rick Wheatley, a friend of mine whose ambition is to help leaders break out of the old ways of thinking and see new possibilities that enhance commercial success while creating the future we need. He's the founder of System 7, an advisory firm he started in Oslo in May of 2021. And their underlying aim is to help businesses that matter to the future outperform the ones who don't. They are inspired by the idea of forced transitions, an oft-repeated phenomenon in which societies and businesses seem to get surprised by major shifts, despite the writing having been on the wall for some time, and in neon lights at that. System 7 equips leadership teams to avoid forced transitions and transform with intent. We cover a lot in this conversation, from mountain climbing to sailing to the state of the world and thoughts on how to make things better. There's a lot here, so grab that favorite beverage or throw on those running shoes and enjoy this conversation with Rick. Hi, Rick. Thank you so much for joining us. It's so nice to have you with us today. How are you?
Doing really well. It's great to be here.
So I'm looking at your mountain house. You're obviously up in the mountains. Where are you?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm in Rjukan in Norway, which is 2.5 hours directly west of the city of Oslo.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And if anybody's ever seen that heavy water World War II Netflix series, right? When the Germans were trying to manufacture an atomic bomb or a nuclear bomb, they were sourcing material from here. So this was, there's a World War II movie with some fancy old World War II era actors in it. And then there's a more recent one on Netflix. So it all happened right out here outside the window.
And I saw you post the other day that you were mowing the roof.
Exactly. Yeah, I was up there with a weed whacker.
Explain that. I mean, so you must just be this built into the rock.
No, it's a standalone house, but looking out the window here, most of the buildings have grass on the roof.
How extraordinary.
It's just a Norwegian tradition. And, if you just get up there every late August, early September and just knock it all down, it stays in better shape the next year. So
how amazing.
When in Rome.
Yeah, right. Now your accent's obviously not Norwegian. So talk to us about your background.
I'm originally from Vermont in the northeast of the U.S. Bernie Sanders and Ben and Jerry's country. Yeah. And Burton snowboards too, by the way. Fewer people understand that, right? So grew up there until the age of 22, I guess. Went to university there, went to a small military university. Was in the Army for 4 years. I did some Army time in South Korea and then on the west coast of the U.S., which was interesting I was 22 years old, second lieutenant, showing up in South Korea, which was a place where I felt like the third world and the first world were like wall to wall. South Korean teenagers were proximity dating on telephones in 1998.
Wow,
right?
Really?
I had these little programs, and when you got close to somebody in a mall or someone who was looking for somebody like you, then a little light on the antenna would start to blink.
Oh, right? My gosh. Yeah. 1998.
In 1998, right? So when I left the US, I don't think I even had a cell phone. And then when I got to South Korea, I was promptly given one by a local fixer out in the village, right? So that was really cool. So I was there for 4 years, then was recruited out of the military by an IT firm that Ross Perot owned at that point. He was always gathering young officers. I left the military because I felt, one, there wasn't a lot going on. Two, we were training for things that seemed like they were never going to happen. Obviously, a lot has happened then, and people that I was in with have experienced many things that I feel fortunate to to not have under my belt at this stage. Yeah, I worked in IT for a while in the healthcare sector and did that in Southern California for 3.5 years or something like that. And just thought this business stuff is interesting, but I don't know if I want to do the grind in SoCal on 8-lane in both direction highways. And so I was spending a lot of time skiing and mountain biking in my free time and fell in with a group of telemark skier bad actor types who would go to the Alps every year. And so I got involved with that trip and my mind was blown by the Alps. I mean, the mountains in North America are amazing, but there's something about the Alps that are really unique in the history and alpinism and skiing and all this stuff that exists there. And it was either in my second or third year going to the Alps that I met the woman that I would marry from Oslo. Had Swedish originally, but had moved here when she was a teenager because of a job her father had gotten. We're no longer married. We're very good friends, but we have 3 pretty awesome kids.
Yeah.
One who's probably going to end up down here at some point asking me what the hell I'm doing. And,
I look forward to meeting her. I mean, I've seen so many pictures and seen her kind of grow up through social media.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So that's sort of how things got started. I thought I was going to be an Army officer. I thought that was what I was going to do. And then I was spending all of my free time climbing and skiing and goofing around in the mountains.
And you're now also a sailor, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I am. And that was also by mistake. When I moved to Norway in 2003, it was really difficult to get a job without speaking Norwegian back then. And so I ended up working for a professional sailing team for a couple of years.
Oh my gosh, really? And this is before you were a sailor?
Yeah, as a Boy Scout, I had, sailed lasers and weird stuff like that, right? A little bit. Yeah. My then brother-in-law, was good friends and worked a bit with a guy named Knut Frostad, who was a Olympic sailor, maybe Olympic windsurfer, I think, and had later done the Volvo Ocean Race a few times. Did it as a skipper twice, and then actually sailed on Brazil 1 once or twice with Torben Grael.
I know Torben. And actually Guga, when he sailed against him, he beats Torben. It's actually quite a thing. Okay. But anyway, yes, right? I know Torben. Yeah. And Lars.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. Okay, right. So Knut spent a lot of time sailing with Torben. Small world, right? But that project was a Orma 60 trimaran. So these French trimarans that have 400 square meters of sail and go like 30, 40 knots, right? Amazing, amazing boats. This was before foils. So these things sailed on the water, not above the water. And I did logistics stuff for them and got involved in a company that Knut had started with my brother-in-law. And then I eventually became a part owner in that company. And the idea was to do leadership and team stuff on the boat.
Yeah. Very cool.
But if I'm honest, at the age, whatever age I was at that stage, I didn't know anything about what I was doing, right? So I had a great idea, but I was really a bit too inexperienced to pull it off. So not much came out of it. But I did have the opportunity to do a little bit of transport sailing with those guys. That's what opened my eyes. Wow, the ocean, the speed, the force. I remember one time we had clients with us and Knut gave me the tiller. We were sailing in the inner Oslo fjord, like right in the city, basically. Mm-hmm. And we were going 28 knots.
Oh my God! Really?
The water was totally flat, right? And so the person steering is up here, right, out of the water, maybe 2 meters out of the water, and he was sitting just on the other side of the tiller from me so that he could grab it and save the day if I did something stupid. And he looked at me, and he probably said this to everybody who's ever been at the tiller going fast on that boat. He said, "I've gotten so many tickets. But if the police pull us over here, it's on you," right? So some great memories with those guys. And when I stopped working with them, I knew at some point I want to do this myself, obviously on a very different scale. So we have a nice little cruising boat. That's great fun.
It's interesting that you talked about the sailing and it was sort of leadership development kind of stuff then, but too young, you didn't really understand what that was about. But you then did get into leadership development. That's actually what you do, right? It's a big part of what you did. Maybe you can talk to us just about that journey.
I started a hell of a learning journey, I guess you could say, when I started working with Knut and that team and with my brother-in-law, Max Utropé, who is also in the space. So he was a great mentor. And they both introduced me to a network of much more experienced people. So I was a second or third chair on leadership development programs for, 4 or 5 years at that point. I basically followed these more experienced facilitators and consultants around for a number of years, doing little bit parts in these programs, and then over time learning more and doing more. Until 2008 or 9, I started designing and delivering some smaller versions of those things myself. But I mean, I had the opportunity to learn from some absolutely amazing people. And a lot of this stuff was human potential movement, Esalen, Santa Cruz inspired stuff. The first programs that I worked on were very self-awareness oriented. These were the sorts of things where people cry on Wednesdays and are superheroes by Friday sort of thing, like these sort of deep awareness oriented programs, which was really eye-opening for me. So in the beginning of those things, I was pretending as hard as I could. Like I, one, knew what was going on because the language wasn't always necessarily one that I understood, and two, was comfortable with what was going on. But it was a hell of a learning opportunity and learning journey.
And just reflecting on what you now know about leadership development and also how you see the world and the direction that it's going in and just how it is now. And we talked about this a little bit on the phone the other day. When you look at vertical development and the leadership competencies that are needed in today's world, what can you say about that?
The first seven or 8 years of my experience in that were very sort of inner journey oriented, self-awareness and developmental psychology and those sorts of things. Like if you can become truly aware, then you can become a better leader. I do believe that's true. The 9 years that I spent after that, I joined a company after that and did a lot of this work, but from a very different perspective. It was from almost the purely intellectual one. The result of all of that experience, when you put it together, is there's a really interesting symbiosis between what needs to be true on the inner side and on the outer side. We always used to say, like, the development experiences that we're trying to design for people are designed so that we take people to the edge of their mental model or their mental map and we nudge them on, right? So that's like a horizontal version of what we talk about when we say vertical development, right? Mm-hmm. So there are, and we were working on a design yesterday for a program we're doing for IKEA right now, where we're spending a lot of time talking about the difference between adaptive and technical challenges. The nature of the world today is such that its complexity overwhelms our ability to deal with the complexity given the way that we think and are at the moment. Adaptive challenges require the leader and the organization and the team and the person to actually change in order to be useful against the challenge. If you operate something of a certain size and you've sort of come up through the levels and you've learned the different pieces of it and you get to a management or leadership position of that organism where you truly understand it, you can be quite an effective manager or leader. But in a global organization today, it's very likely that at some point your vertical rise in the organization is going to outpace your ability to understand all the pieces and parts.
Nice.
And I think that's an interesting, it's almost like a molting that a leadership needs to go through. And you need to completely release the need that you've had to have control of and understand all of the elements and adapt a completely new way of being and thinking about reality. That's a pretty intellectual thing, actually, but it has very many psychological underpinnings and components in order to be able to do that thing intellectually. That's one aspect of it, but there's two other things that I think are interesting to add to it. One is, I went to this climate reality training that Al Gore and his organization put on in Istanbul a number of years ago. And he mentioned that we have 3 budgets, and the one that I'll mention is the emotional budget. We have only so much capacity for bad news or things that we're uncomfortable with. That's a factor. In leading change or in leading organizations, people are very motivated to look away from things that they either are overwhelmed by or just don't like. Very prevalent in the world today, obviously. That one factor is driving a lot. And then there's a third thing, right? So the third thing is cognitive bias. And I would put that in a slightly different bucket than just not wanting to look at the negatives. The amount of pre-programming and cognitive bias that exists in the leadership situations that many of us find ourselves in today is huge. And there's obviously many, many types of it. But when you go back to sort of the root of your question, vertical development and leadership given the state of the world today, all of these things are playing a role. And it makes it a really, really complicated environment to operate effectively in. And then you add on top of that, if we are to be successful, we need such an amazing degree of pretty high level multi-stakeholder collaboration, win-win thinking, et cetera, et cetera.
So that brings me actually beautifully to System 7. I'd love to understand more about it. So how did it come about? What is it that you do?
In my last role, where I worked with an absolutely amazing group of people, I had the opportunity to spend 4 or 5 years being sort of a challenger for an oil and gas company that was trying to understand if it should go greener or not. I had the opportunity to do some really interesting work with senior folks in Unilever and some other organizations. And one of the reflections that I had after doing that for several years was, I think it's pretty impactful working at this level, but I would also really like to be working with the investor level, because very often we find limitations inside the businesses based on what the investors are willing to tolerate, fund, based on how much risk they're interested in, accepting, etc. 2 years ago, I started a conversation with an investor named Rainier Indahl, who was actually introduced to me by Knut many years ago. And I did a quick project with Rainier in a previous private equity firm that he was part of, Altor, during that phase where I was sort of young and learning the ropes, as it were. He's since started a private equity firm called Summa Equity, whose investment thesis is around, investing to solve global challenges. So it's an ESG-oriented, sustainability-oriented private equity firm. They have 3 funds under management. The last one that they closed late last year is 2.3 billion euros. It's an Article 9 impact fund as well. So they're actually obligated to make sure that they place that in a way that is very impact aligned. So System 7 was created based on a project idea that Rainier and I had, which was around how can we accelerate the sustainability strategies and performance of companies that Summa buys. The name is a bit weird, but chosen on purpose. We've done so much work with systems thinking over the years, and we live in a world of overlapping, intertwining systems. So that's something that we wanted to take with us. And then we've also worked with very many leaders that, regardless of the fact that we live in a very systemic environment, want to simplify every complex thing into a list of 3 points. We picked the number 7 because 7's like just slightly too many things to hold in your mind at one time.
Yeah.
And that's the reality that we live in. So we just put systems and 7 together.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, that's nice. I like that.
We are absolutely engaged in leadership development.
Yeah.
We are engaged in helping leaders build fluency in the sustainability and ESG space. And we're engaged in helping them think creatively about what impact could be for their organizations. Our experience is that when people think about sustainability and ESG, they take a space that's this big and they think about a space that's this large. They often take what's a pretty expansive canvas and reduce it to carbon emissions. That completely misses out on the social piece. So they do 2 things. They think about carbon emissions, and then they think about things that are within their own boundaries, within the boundaries of their own organization. Thinking about how to change things within the boundaries of our organizations is not going to change the world. It's going to help us do some house cleaning, which we should do. But thinking about how we can reorient our organizations to solve environmental and social problems and governance problems that others have is where we can change the world. And the governance piece has been a bit of a dark horse, I think, when you look at how a due diligence might be done on an investment case by a sustainable investor. They'll often look at the E and the S inside the company and maybe slightly outside. The G will be purely inside: diversity, equal pay for equal work. Let's look at gender balance on your board and in your leadership, those sorts of things, right? But what we've seen over the past several months with this war in Ukraine is that governance and government is in fact a really, really important thing that business needs to have a position on. Are you in support of policies, industry organizations, chambers of commerce, et cetera, that are advocating for peace, the rule of law, human rights, and all of these sorts of things? Or are you telling yourself a bedtime story that you're a business, you're too small to have a view on that, it's none of your business? If you're the second, you could find yourself at some point in a situation like has happened in Ukraine, where suddenly governance falls apart. Now, governance in Ukraine has not fallen apart. They're proving themselves to be superheroes at this moment. But global governance, multilateral collaboration, the United Nations, peace and the rule of law, etc., is vital to healthy businesses and healthy societies. So we're trying to help business leaders take a more expansive view on what ESG is and how they can play. So that's the third thing. We've built an impact map together with Summa, which sounds incredibly boring, but I think is actually quite exciting. The impact space is large. Anytime you go into a new area that you're unfamiliar with, whether it's in the mountains or on the ocean, you're probably going to bring a map. So we've created a map for the impact space. It's been a little bit inspired by the scopes of emissions from emissions tracking. What we've tried to help businesses do is having conversations with businesses where you say, like, I know that you're doing this thing here, but if you're able to expand the way that you think about that and understand what value might be created for other commercial partners that you haven't thought of, if you do a good job at that, you could have impacts that are actually even further out and are at a societal level. And don't forget, the result is that an industry standard has been created, and that industry standard can then likely be transferred to other markets.
Can you give us a quick story how you would work with IKEA or how you would work with a private equity firm from a leadership development point of view?
One of the things that we're doing is we are doing leadership programs where we're building in an adventure element. We've had a couple of examples of that over the past few months. We're doing some programs for PE professionals where the first module, which is close to home, doesn't take too much time, is focused on some self-oriented stuff. Yeah. Some of it's self-awareness, some of it's sort of personality preferences driven, et cetera, right? And then the second module is team-oriented. This team session needs to be one where you get pushed off the map gently.
Yeah. Yeah.
It needs to be something that's physical. It needs to be something with a high degree of nature content. Third week of August, we had a group of professionals from a PE firm, all at the same level, a community, directors, staying at 2,800 meters in the Alps at the foot of a absolutely amazing glacier in a summer where more glacial melting has happened than I think is on record, right? And we did a mix of sessions where we talked about team dynamics and what builds high performance teams, one of which interestingly is shared consciousness, which just means being in the same mental space together and cultivating that over time. And obviously being up there at 2,800 meters without any coverage gives an experience of that, of being someplace special, of being there together, of not being disturbed, having some mental space. And then the other thing that we did is we took them, none of them were experienced on this, and did some alpine climbing. Nice. Alpine rock climbing. So we had three professional mountain guides with us. Two of them are geologists and specialists in glacial melting and climate change and things like that, and have done seasons in Antarctica. Wow. So lots of that sort of content, right? And then we pushed ourselves off our map and got pretty high up on some pretty jagged ridge lines and climbed around and tested ourselves physically and mentally and did that as teams. So that's an example of something where investors and private equity folks, they work probably harder and more intensely than many other professions that I've dealt with in the past. And when you're working with capital, with investment, I think a lot of these people have more influence on our future than they realize. Getting them away and really creating that headspace, reconnecting with the natural world. We had another group of them crawling around in the caves under Budapest a few weeks ago, right?
Yeah, I saw that, yeah.
Doing some basic stuff that humans do when they're growing up. That's something that we're trying to bring to the leadership development space. Leadership development is what it is. There's maybe not actually a lot of variation in best practice today, but I think the way that it gets done, the surroundings, and how you create space for it is probably a spot for innovation.
Totally agree. Now, you obviously work in the area of, you talk a lot about ESGs. You just talked about it. I loved a post that you posted probably 9 months ago, I guess, questioning the relevance of ESGs and how when the same ESG reporting suggests that ExxonMobil is a leader in ESGs, how can we trust ESGs? What does it even mean? Yeah, what is your opinion on this?
When ESG first came about, there was version 1 and there was version 2. Version 1 was about protecting investments and investors from risks that came from environmental risks, social risks, and government risks, right? So that's not about protecting the world. That's about protecting the money. That's how it started. When that example with ExxonMobil and Tesla, it was a Moody's ranking or something like that, right? ExxonMobil is doing a better job of protecting itself from ESG risk than Tesla is. So just hold that thought. Version 2 of ESG is how companies are helping to protect society from risks in the environmental, social, and governance space. And there you could say that while ExxonMobil is providing energy to society that society uses, they're doing all kinds of other things. And they persist and they lobby and they do all manner of things to protect their profits, but in a way that actually exacerbates risk to the environmental society and governance.
Planet.
Right?
Yeah.
To the planet, right? Whereas, Tesla is arguably doing some other things that are really, really impressive for the future. That's, I think, super interesting. And that's the problem with ESG in a way. If it's about protecting the money, then we're going to protect the money to our detriment. I always say the planet's going to be fine. The planet doesn't care. We won't be fine. The rest of, the animal kingdom won't be fine. That's what we're trying to protect.
Yeah. So then that brings me to a few of my sort of big meaty questions. How do we make ESGs not just a box ticking exercise? One. And two, how do we make it not just about protecting the money? And how do we make this more of a real thing that is about real, tangible action. It's something that I get really frustrated by because really our projects and all of our programs are made with constraints at the core. And the difference that we are able to make is massive. And I just think, Christ almighty, these companies have so much money and there's so much that they could do and they're not. And so, and obviously we're at a moment right now, that the world hangs on the precipice of change. And there's obviously this now unique economic climate in the wake of a pandemic. We're seeing inflation, high cost of living, vulnerable client growth portfolios, the growth of technology and challenges to establish corporate concepts. And it's all colliding with this new situation. And it's accelerating the creation of a new global status quo. There's a lot going on. And I've heard people talk about purpose is impossible in this current climate, just can't be the focus. ESGs, we're going to focus on them, but they're just going to turn into a box-ticking exercise because, to be honest, we really can't focus on, much more than that in this current climate. And I just wonder, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I don't know why, but for some reason, over the last few days, in my feeds, there's a lot more Lord of the Rings material.
Yeah, totally.
Like a lot more Saving Middle-earth material. And the reason I mention that is because we are sort of a little bit in a situation like that. We're at a point in time where either we really get serious about the future of humanity and all of the natural systems that we rely upon, or things are going to go quite badly. I spend a lot of time thinking about the leadership that happened in the World War II era, the Marshall Plan, all of these things that were actually quite long-sighted and visionary, right? And really shaped the next generation of progress. And I wish we had more of those types of leaders around us today. Something's happened to us. I think it's pretty clear. I'm worried about that. Last week in a session, I put a slide up that had a picture of a snapshot from Hamilton, the musical, on it. And there was a quote, "If you stand for nothing, Burr, what will you fall for?" So, this purpose piece is absolutely critical. And one of the things that we spend all of our time working on, despite that second pillar that I talked about before, people can't handle that much negative. We spend all of our time trying to help people relate to, whether it's IKEA or Summa companies, et cetera, that we're working with, relate to the reality of what's happening in the world. And then we try to imagine how we could expand the responsibility that we have while still being a business. There's one thing that I think is hopeful. It's not hopeful, but at the same time it is. And that is 15 years ago, working in this space, we talked about risks that were going to emerge sometime over the horizon, but we didn't know when. One of the things that's happening in real time around us right now, Hurricane Ian, not to mention what's happened in Pakistan over the past 6 weeks, that is much larger in scale and human suffering. These risks are materializing right now, and they're having geopolitical ramifications, environmental and humanitarian ramifications right now. I see in the businesses that I'm working with increased recognition that we're no longer talking about something that we're trying to protect ourselves from in the future, that it's right here, right now. And I think there could be a bit of a morphing happening where they may say what you just said, we don't have time for purpose right now, but these issues move center stage because it's happening around us right now. It either has a new name or it has no name. It just becomes our new reality. We have to do different things as a result. I'm a little bit hopeful about that. We had Biden and DeSantis traveling around Florida over the last couple of days, right? Which is a rather unexpected thing it takes a major hurricane for that to happen, obviously. The ability of certain groups of primarily populists to hoodwink the population that what's happening outside their window is not happening is limited. I hope so, right? And then I think what's also fortunate is that 10, 20 years into this journey around sustainability and ESG, the honest fact is nobody knew how to do this stuff when we started it. So there's 10 to 15 years of learning that's happened. And there are starting to be more and more good examples of companies that have created successes, right? I am hopeful about that. In a session last week, we used that map to share a Tesla story, and then we overlaid it with a local company. And you see some leaders in the audience say things like, "I didn't realize that we were allowed to be visionary about the impact our businesses could create and to be creative about it. I thought that we were supposed to focus on the carbon." And I understand why they say that, because that's where things have been for a long time, right? But when we expand the playing field, it makes it possible for lots of people to do other things. Not every company is an oil and gas company. Not every company is a car company. There's many companies who actually don't have a huge amount of negative impact to mitigate, but have huge huge potential in terms of the positives that they could do.
It's about creating agency for people. And that's where we work, right? And I think that's the power. What you've just said is so incredible. If people suddenly realize that I can be the driver of change. Oh, hold on a second. So I can use my ideas and I can be a driver of change. Like, yes, that's yes, that's actually totally it. You are our saviors. We just need more people to realize it.
I had another CFO come to me and say, hey, if we could talk to our team in this way, it would really inspire them. Because, one of the things that's negative about ESG is that it's become a paper drill. Yeah. It's so reporting driven. When you have small companies that have limited carbon emissions being overwhelmed by reporting requirements, it means that they don't spend much time on what they could be doing with the businesses that they operate that would benefit in either the environmental, social, or governance space, right? So we're consuming all of our energy on activities that maybe don't generate much progress.
That's fascinating, which is also why it's a huge reason why knowing that the ideas and the drive for change can come from so many different places, unlocking that. And are you spending the energy in the right areas? And then the question is back to the two ways of ESGs. If it is just a box ticking exercise and if it is saving our money, well, then they actually don't care about igniting the power of the individuals. But if you really are interested in the second option of ESGs, then you can't do it alone. And it's not going to be the CEO who's doing it either. It's going to be the people who are driving these companies within these companies that are coming up with the ideas, that are finding the solutions. They need to feel empowered enough. And then that's the thing, is back to what you do and what we do, which is helping people realize what they can do and then helping them see the world and themselves in a different way to be able to drive it.
Exactly. And that's really the heart of it. That's brilliantly synthesized.
So another quick question, because you are talking to many of the companies that are thinking this. Net zero, which is another big one, right? Corporate and company leaders are talking and agreeing about the importance of net zero. And this has been something we've been talking about for a really long time. We know we need to act now, but the collateral impacts of net zero or absolute zero need to be carefully assessed, because in this current climate that we're in, climate environmental issues, is it possible to solve them in a world that's in recession? And then do we need growth to be able to get to net zero, to be able to figure out what those solutions are? Do companies have a responsibility to enforce net zero? You've been working in this area for a really long time. I mean, I have opinions on it and I have opinions on how to get there, some of which we've just talked about. But I'd love to know your thoughts on all of this, because this is also a bit of a hot topic. I don't believe that people even know what to do. So it's a bit kind of deer caught in the headlights. I don't know. Do you know? I don't know. Do you know? Well, let's just wait it out. But we can't wait it out because we can't wait it out. So
yeah, one of the reasons for the crisis in Europe right now is because they didn't go net zero fast enough. The reason that Europe is exposed to expensive fossil fuels or cares that Russia has cut off those gas pipelines underneath the Baltic Sea is because Europe hasn't gone net zero fast enough. Borrowing energy from 40 million years ago and transporting it up from the depths in a physical form that either needs to be piped or barreled, right, or brought on tankers and is very heavy and very dense around the world is not a particularly efficient way to do energy. Even in Norway right now, which is pretty far north, there's a solar revolution happening right now because people recognize that the closer that I can move the point of energy collection to myself, the more control I have over it, the more I can insulate myself from the sort of energy price volatility that's happening in Europe right now. It's completely unbelievable what's happened with energy prices. Going net zero because it's good for the climate is not the only reason we're going to be going net zero. Decarbonizing our energy system is also an incredibly smart geopolitical move because we insulate ourselves from factors that we cannot control. We have over the last 15 or 20 years, though, been on a huge technology journey. And at the beginning of that journey, technologies that were required for this were a combination of not efficient enough and too expensive. But, the efforts of Germany in the beginning and then China have done wonders for the solar panel cost curves. I mean, the efforts of Tesla and others on the battery front, we're at a point now where it's much less expensive than it has been to invest in these sorts of technologies. And I think the wave of investment that's going to happen right now in different parts of the world because of this energy price volatility and this conflict in Europe is going to push a lot of that stuff down further. That's not going to solve the problem, but I think that's going to help. The other thing that I would say is you've probably heard about all kinds of companies and countries making net zero commitments. Mm-hmm. And then there's been some really good stuff. Okay, so there was a letter, this is probably 9 days ago now, from the New York City comptroller to BlackRock, to Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, one of the biggest investors in the world, saying you spoke very loudly about all these commitments that you guys were making about net zero and all manner of other things, but we see relatively little progress toward those commitments. We need to be super careful about confusing commitments with action. So there's been a tremendous amount of greenwashing where people have been making commitments but going no further. Right. So that's another thing that we need to really be paying close attention to, I think. That's very much on the agenda for the SEC and for governments these days. We're seeing investigations into corporations that have been doing those sorts of things, right? So there's a gentleman that spoke at the SUMA event last week named Tariq Fancy, who used to lead sustainable investing for BlackRock, and who quit, and then who wrote a series of blogs that are just absolutely amazing for anybody who's interested in this. Wow. And he made a couple interesting points that I think are relevant to share. One is there's been so much energy and activity spent on talking about commitments and targets. It's given people a false sense of how much progress is happening around us. The fact of the matter is that there's entirely too little progress happening. A lot of commitments being made, but those are essentially marketing. I think we're going to see here in the near future a real split between who's serious and who's just making forward-looking marketing statements, basically in the form of climate commitments, et cetera. So it's a bit of a come to Jesus moment in the whole space, to be honest with you. And that's overlaid with, as you said, recession, potentially inflation, conflict. All of these things are coming to a head. I wonder if that creates a bit of an opportunity too, because Pakistan, ridiculously hot summer in Europe, drought, Hurricane Ian, etc., right? All of these things are still happening, wildfires all over the world. So it isn't like these things are going to stop because we're having a recession. So we're going to have to dig ourselves out of this hole in a way that also helps us with regard to some of these risks. Yeah. I really do feel that that will be unavoidable. And what you saw with DeSantis when he has a hurricane in his own state, it is necessary for him to tone down the shit talking he's doing because he finds himself in a reality that doesn't match what he's saying.
I see two things. I see one, but necessity being the mother of invention. Yeah. And then I think to the greenwashing and the purpose piece, I think it comes down to it could just be about commitments. It could just be about saying a whole lot of stuff. But to be honest, the people working for you are going to know. And it's going to come out in the wash eventually, showing who's actually doing things like Patagonia, who actually is standing for something. And I don't believe that purpose goes away in a recession. Actually, I think it becomes even stronger at moments like this.
I think you're right.
Companies that are really properly standing for something. And then those are the companies that people want to engage with, want to invest in, the question is whether it all happens quick enough.
You know, I mentioned that World War II generation thing. One of the things that probably made them as effective as they were was that they were faced with some really large challenges that they had to tackle. One of the features that we've had since World War II is that with the exception of a couple of blips, things have just gone gangbusters. Yeah. And that's meant that fewer and fewer great people have gotten involved in government. Yeah. There's been a lot of collective enrichment going on, right? So a real reality check might thrust us into a different reality now. And then it's an adaptive challenge, right? So it's going to be a question about whether or not we are all able to evolve into what we need to become to deal with this, or if we continue to sit here on our phones and look at TikTok and do other things.
That's why I just think what we're doing, both of our work, is so important right now, because it's the moment where we need to help people respond to, be more resilient, respond to these challenges, putting people on mountains or sailing in a boat or, all of these different challenges, and, ours being the way that Thai works as well. I think it's about getting people to see themselves and see the world in a different way, and then to be able to respond. The more actually we're talking about it, the more I just realize that this is a huge part. This is a huge competitive advantage for companies that actually realize that giving agency to their people and giving them the power to be able to rise up is actually the answer, I think, to a lot of us.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit humble there, right? So we're trying and we're doing our part, and I think it's like unfolding, and we're learning all the time.
Yeah, of course.
But we're committed to continuing to learn how to do what we need to do to be useful as folks try to do that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, you and I have spoken a lot about Thai over the years, and obviously both of us working in leadership development, we've kind of covered this now. Why in your mind are initiatives like this then important?
There's something super healthy about overwhelming a system. That's one of the ways that you force an evolution. You overwhelm the old system. It just gets so overwhelmed that the old way of being becomes obviously very useless.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
And then things start to happen. You know what I mean? I think that's part of this game in micro and macro ways.
Yeah,
probably for both of us, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting. I was doing this one program with a client several months ago, and they had a pretty good portion of the people in the program were leaders from Russia. Our initial sessions were before any of this happened. And we were talking about adaptive challenges. And we were talking about the difference between complexity and complicated. And I think for them at that time, it felt a little bit academic. So my hope is that we're putting some stuff in people's toolboxes that maybe feels a little bit academic when they get it. But then at some period of time, a little bit after, they're like, shit, I've got that thing in there somewhere. Where is it? And they pull it out and they use it. So, and maybe that's like two different parts of this. One is like opportunities to immerse people and overwhelm their systems so that they have an evolution. Awesome. But also the more regular sort of development work where you're able to put some stuff in people's toolboxes in hopes that they take it out at the right.
Yeah, that's nice. We have come to the end of the podcast, but I just wonder, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you'd like to tell our listeners?
I think one of the things that I would say is that I wonder if there's lots of people walking around out there thinking that it's just them, feeling that it's a little bit rough right now. I had a conversation with somebody yesterday about this, where this woman sort of had she had a moment, she sort of crumbled a little bit and tried to catch herself and she couldn't, right? And then talked to her a couple hours later and she said, yeah, I went for a walk with a friend and she told me that she's just really having a hard time right now too. And then I talked to my husband and he said that his boss, almost had a breakdown when she dropped a cell phone. So I feel like very many of us right now are maybe a little bit on the edge and connecting with each other and accepting that rather than trying to push it off and pretend like it's not the case is maybe important at this moment. Because when you step back and you think about the different issues that are sort of overlapping, it's pretty unlike anything that many of us have lived with in our lifetimes, right? The COVID thing was one thing, but now it's almost like there's COVID plus 5 or 6 others. And they're all really complex and they require us to be the very best versions of ourselves in order to be able to live good lives in the midst of them, but also do anything to try to solve them. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing that's maybe struck me over the last couple of days. There's something there. Everybody's having a hard time right now. Let's take care of each other. Talk about it.
Well, ask for help. And together we are stronger. Totally.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it was really nice really nice to talk. So much there and lots of really great reflections there. So I really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Right.
Take care.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, this is Philippa again. I hope you enjoyed listening. Now this is your chance to get involved with TIE. If you work in the commercial world, whatever your profession, your position, or your experience, then TIE could be for you. You may have been in business for decades, but have always felt there's another way. Or you may just have a few years experience, but want to do more. Equally, if you want to create game-changing employees and see your company impact the world, we've got you covered. TIE has never been more necessary than right now, and you can be a part of it. Reach out to me at philippa@theinternationalexchange.co.uk and I can tell you more. Or join the TIE Accelerator info session for more information. apply.tieaccelerator.com. Better leaders, better companies, better world. I'm your host, Philippa White. This podcast has been co-produced by Berna Vieira and me, music by Berna Vieira, and artwork by Kelps Vahais. I hope we'll meet again soon.